أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
وعليكم السلام ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.
Alhamdulillah, Qari brothers are here again on your screens. And today, what we're going to be talking about is something very important and very peculiar to most Muslims youth in our parts and in different parts of the world. The topic for that matter is going to be identity crisis. And before we proceed, we would like to know what exactly does identity crisis means, and Rahmatullah will help us trying to understand what exactly it means, inshallah.
So, identity crisis, by definition, refers to the internal struggle that an individual might find his or herself in regarding his cultural, religious, and societal influences around him. So that's what basically identity crisis means.
So if I understand you very well, what it means is that when someone has a difficulty in trying to balance their social, cultural, and religious differences,
yeah,
how to be able to
navigate
through them.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think first of all, now we have had the definition of what identity crisis means. We should be able to know what causes it. Like sometimes, what brings about the identity crisis in our today's society. I think it's very important for us to know that.
Yeah. So I think one of the prominent causes of identity crisis in the Muslim world is due to the negative representation of Islam on the media. You know, the mass media has been able to infiltrate the minds of many non-Muslims, including the Muslims youth of today, to think that their religion is somewhat
oppressive,
or faulty, something like that. One of the examples I can cite is the issue of terrorism. The media has successfully, I think, it's on the decline now. But for some years, the media has portrayed Islam as some sort of a terrorist religion that preaches nothing except terrorism. And it was even said that the 9/11 that happened, was it 2011?
2001 or 2000?
Yeah. That it was Muslims. I think there are many theories that proves otherwise. But those are things the mass media has been able to put in the minds of young Muslims of today. So when they go somewhere, they feel the need, like they don't feel proud to identify as Muslims because of these portrayals of Islam. So I think pretty much that has been the most important element that contributes to the issue of
identity crisis. So I understand something. That means like when Muslims go somewhere else, they don't want to be seen as people of violence. So they pretend to be who they are, maybe in certain environments.
And even to some extent, you know, there are verses that talks about terrorism in the Quran. And like, that's what the mass media
has been saying.
Like that's what they predicate everything upon. And some Muslims, they feel shy, like they feel like they want to distance themselves from these verses, not knowing those verses were revealed in context. So it isn't talking about the modern world. Those verses aren't
applicable now.
They aren't telling Muslims to go attack people here and there. This is what most people think. So I think understanding these verses also can help us Muslims in like combating the plague of identity crisis.
And then one of the examples of those verses is in Surah At-Tawbah, where Allah said we should kill the non-believers wherever we see
was the
them.
verse in Arabic?
يا أيها الذين آمنوا قاتلوا الذين يلونكم من الكفار
وليجدوا
وليجدوا
فيكم
فيكم
غلظة
غلظة.
اقتلوا المشركين حيث وجدتموهم. Yeah.
We should kill the non-believers wherever we
you
find them.
So as a lay person, when you read this for the first time, when you read it like on face value, you think, oh, Allah is commanding us to kill any person who doesn't believe in Islam, which is far from the truth. So I think knowledge and proper education can, in like on the issue of the mass media portraying Islam negatively, we being educated can help massively on
To change
this,
the narrative.
to change the narrative.
I think that's very important. The mass media has been, to a certain degree, so detrimental to the Muslims and their growth. So for me, what I think of regarding the causes of the identity crisis would be, I think, peer pressure. Sometimes the people we found ourselves with, let's say the people we hang out with, the people we try to associate with, they sometimes have, to a certain degree, influence on how we live our lives.
Yeah.
So when people try to live with people who doesn't really believe in their religious teachings and values, sometimes it influences them. They go to places where, let's say, you have friends who are not Muslims, or maybe who are Muslims on the face value, I would say. They are Muslims, they're not Muslims to the core. When they go do things which are against the teachings of Islam, sometimes you are influenced, like you want to be like them. You also want to have fun, as they usually say. So to a certain degree, you would want to put your Muslim identity aside and then try to act like them, so that you are not seen as the outcast, someone who is not, who is not fitting into the group and stuff like that. So people,
And sometimes they would shame you for not doing those kinds of things. For example, partying. As a young Muslim of today in this part of the world, if you're not partying, or you are not used to that woke kind of life, you are seen as someone like not very
modern, you are
modern.
outdated.
You are not so bright. You don't know what fun is.
You don't know what's up.
Yeah. So in trying to please these people, in trying to make yourself look like you are part of this generation, you lose your identity as a Muslim. And I think we should be mindful of those kind of friends. And I think, as I mentioned earlier, proper education can help us eradicate all those things. So we as the youth, we should think within ourselves and not get carried away by the things others say is fun or not. We shouldn't let others define what fun is or what entertainment is. There are like oodles of ways as a Muslim you can have fun. Like there are ways you can entertain yourself, and partying or like drinking isn't one of them. So I think, yeah, that's pretty much about it.
Do you have another example, or let's say one of the causes of identity crisis? We've mentioned the representation of mass media. We've talked about how the people we hang out with can influence or can cause us to have a conflict between our Islamic identity and that of the societal and then cultural expectations. Do you have any more?
I think one of them is also, in this part of the world, it has to be like family expectations or like cultural expectations of you. So sometimes your family or your culture might demand you to do something that is in direct contrary, that is in direct contrast to the teaching of Islam, and you are caught in between the loop of pleasing the society or your parents and respecting
The rules
your
of Islam.
identity as a Muslim.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of them. I think one of the examples is, I mentioned it sometime, is the issue of like one of the cultural practices we do over here is a fire festival. So as a Muslim and as a Dabumba man, so you have this like this expectations to participate in some of the cultural rituals and everything, and you know clearly your religion practice against any kind of polytheism, like associating or like sacrificing things to anything other than Allah. So you are caught in between this thing, and you would have to choose, like, do I side with my cultural side as a say the Bumba, or do I side with my religious side as a Muslim? So this is
Another example of
another
that.
example.
I think culturally, many people, or many of us as Muslims, we do have that challenge. There are many things, I wouldn't say many, but there are some things in our cultural practices that sometimes go against what Islam teaches us. And in our parts of the world, sometimes the practices of our forefathers are somehow seen superior to that of Islam. They'll say, this is what we are used to. They say it in our language like, they've been doing this for centuries now, before Islam even came.
You know, like interestingly, there is a verse like that and that addresses the issue of like prioritizing your forefathers' footsteps over the teachings of Islam. I think the verse says something like inna wajadna aba'ana ala umma wa inna ala atharihim muqtadun. So like people think that, oh, because our forefathers were on this path for centuries, we cannot abandon it for anything. So these are some things you have to give up for Islam as a Muslim, and as a person with a cultural background.
So usually, like, I think we have a difficulty. I wouldn't say we, but some people in our parts of the world and in other parts of the world that might look like ours, they have a difficulty trying, as you mentioned earlier, trying to please their families. I mean, do what their society expects of them, and then follow the rules of Islam. Sometimes people who are not really strong, who cannot stand on their grounds and say, no, I will not do this, they might have a very difficulty whether they should follow what Islam says, or they should just do what the mass does, let's say what the majority of people in their locality does. So I think I have truly seen the sense in that factor being the cause of identity crisis we faces as the youth of Islam today. I think we do not have to take much time. We need to talk about, maybe in other subsequent episodes, we might talk about more causes of it, but we need to talk about what can we do as Muslims and as youth of Muslims today in combating, this particular problem. It's a problem that we have as Muslims, and it might not just be the youth. I think some people some grown-ups too might have difficulties of that. What do we do as Muslims? Trying to combat all of the challenges we mentioned, the mass media representation, the wrongfully representation of Islam by the mass media, the peer pressure we talked about, and the family and societal expectations. These are the causes we've mentioned. Is there anything we can do as youths?
Yeah, I think I pretty much mentioned it earlier. Education and proper knowledge is very important, is very prominent if we are to do away with this plague. So, for example, I mentioned a particular verse that talks about terrorism in the Quran. So a lay person who doesn't understand, like who has no knowledge of context, person would take it as face value and say, oh, what the media says about my religion is true. Islam is indeed a religion that preaches violence. So I wouldn't be proud to
Be associated with it.
with Islam. Even if I'm preaching, like I'm practicing it, I wouldn't be as proud to identify myself as a Muslim among people. So if we are educated, or if we are able to educate other people efficiently, I think more people would see the light in Islam, and they wouldn't be
Less proud or
they wouldn't find themselves in these like in having to choose whether like I want to follow this or yeah.
I think that's very important. So like means if people are educated, not just Muslims, if non-Muslims are educated on the reasons of those verses in the Quran, maybe it might have a change in what they think.
Yeah.
And then I think one of the things is that like a couple of days ago just on social media, and then I saw someone say the person is not a Muslim. He says that one of the hate speech, the strongest, I'm gonna paraphrase, I can't quote exactly what the person said, but they said, the biggest hate speech right now is Allahu Akbar. That when you hear the word Allahu Akbar,
sometimes shit is about
something is gonna happen. So they have tried to be able to, just as you mentioned, like infiltrate the minds of many people with the word just Allahu Akbar, which literally means God is great. And I think it's not just been said by Muslims. I think the Christians do have their own Allahu Akbar, and the Jews too, I'm sure they do have their own. But the word Allahu Akbar in Arabic has been termed as a very bad word, and whenever you hear that word, it means something bad is about to happen.
something is going to explode.
And so I think for me, what I would suggest is like discussions, open discussions,
Yeah.
as one of the ways to combat such
I
things.
think that's directly linked to the points I raised earlier.
Yeah.
Education. So if we are going to have like proper dialogues and like discussions, I think people who are like some people who are not Muslims, because we haven't had like those many kind of discussions and dialogues with them, we are not able to put our points across, or like represent our religion like
Very well.
very well.
Yeah.
So some as I said earlier, some people take some things at face value, and whatever they read, they don't have to verify. They take it as true. So only if we are able to like sit with them and have a lengthy discussions with them as to some of the reasons why particularly the verses I mentioned were revealed, I think not many people would have that view about Islam, and not many Muslims would be less proud to identify themselves as Muslims. Yeah.
So do you have any other point?
Only
What about taking people, let's say, making people your role models, like people you look at people who have gone through, or maybe like let's say people who have been able to
like navigate through
navigate their way
these
through
struggles. I think that's a very important.
point too.
Yeah, there are people who has been able to navigate their way through all the struggles we've talked about, and when you are able to look up to them, to those kind of people, you take inspirations from their success, and that's where like inspiration is where most people find confidence. And when you are confident enough, you wouldn't be like
You wouldn't feel, let's say, less proud. You would not be hesitant to show who you truly are as a Muslim.
yeah.
I think that's very much it. And then we are done for the day. Hopefully, inshallah. Or you have something else to say?
No.
Well, hopefully, inshallah, we're gonna have more of these episodes in the coming days, and we're very certain that you might have learned one or two things from this discussion. And we hope and pray that we see ourselves again safely and in good condition, inshallah.